The Curse of Redstone Ridge. Leah was never supposed to be out that night. Redstone Ridge had its own set of unspoken rules. The desert, especially near the old reservation, wasn't a place to wander after dark. There were stories, ones passed down for generations, about spirits and creatures that lurked in the shadows, of skinwalkers. Old Man Tenok always warned them about the ridge. His words, more a mutter than a warning, stuck with Leah. "They wear your face," he'd say, his eyes distant, filled with something deeper than just superstition. The older folk took him seriously. Leah? Not so much. It was Saturday evening, and she and her friends had been hanging out by the ridge, drinking and joking, their laughter drifting into the fading daylight. They all knew the rumors, the warnings of strange figures that stalked the desert, cursed beings who wore the skins of those they caught. But to Leah, they were just old tales meant to scare the curious. Her friends, however, weren't so sure. As the wind began to pick up and the shadows stretched out across the sands, they became uneasy, and one by one, they left. But not Leah. She stayed, enjoying the quiet and the stars blinking into the night sky. There was something peaceful about it, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. But then the silence became too thick. The wind, which had been whispering through the desert moments ago, died completely. The air felt unnervingly still, heavy in her lungs. Then a sound, a whisper, faint at first, almost carried on the dead breeze. Leah paused, listening, her heart starting to beat faster. The whisper persisted, growing louder, as if someone was calling her name. She glanced around, but the desert stretched out before her, endless and empty. Nothing but the cold rocks and sand. "Leah." The voice was low, raspy, as if something was trying to mimic human speech, but there was a distortion to it, like it wasn't quite right. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. No one was there. The wind had stopped altogether, and even the air felt dead. Leah tried to laugh it off, convincing herself it was just the alcohol, or maybe the stories Old Man Tenok told creeping into her thoughts. Yet the prickle of unease crept down her spine, the air colder than it should have been. Get it together, she thought, shoving her hands into her jacket pockets. She began walking back to her truck, each step crunching softly on the gravel. But then she heard it. Footsteps just behind her, slightly offbeat from her own. Too slow to be an echo, too deliberate to be the wind. She stopped, her breath freezing in her chest. The footsteps stopped too. She spun around, heart hammering, but the desert remained empty. Only the faint outlines of rocks and cacti stared back at her. The silence pressed against her ears, a ringing sound growing louder with each passing second. Leah quickened her pace, but the footsteps followed, growing louder, heavier. "Leah." This time the voice was unmistakable, deep, guttural. It was closer now, too close. She broke into a run. Her feet stumbled on the loose sand as she sprinted towards the faint lights of the town in the distance. The footsteps behind her quickened, pounding against the earth, closer, closer still. She didn't dare look back. The air thickened around her, making it harder to breathe, like the desert itself was closing in. Suddenly, her foot caught on something, and she fell. Her knees slammed into the hard, rocky ground, pain shooting up her legs. She pushed herself up, but something wet touched her fingers. She froze. The ground beneath her hands was damp. No, sticky. When she lifted her hand, her stomach turned. Blood, dark and fresh, seeped up from the earth itself, staining the ground around her. Leah's breath hitched in her throat. The blood wasn't hers. She tried to move, but her body refused to obey. That's when she saw it. Standing at the edge of her vision was a figure. Its body was twisted, not quite human, but not fully animal. It stood unnaturally tall, its limbs long and misshapen. A decayed animal skull covered its face, But from within the hollow sockets, human eyes gleamed, watching her with a cold, predatory intelligence. The skin draped over its form was stretched like it didn't fit the body it wore. It crouched low, tilting its head as it studied her. Its lips pulled back into a grin, revealing jagged, decaying teeth. "Leah," it rasped again, its voice echoing inside her mind, louder this time, as if it was everywhere at once. Leah tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure moved faster than she could react. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of her, its long, clawed fingers wrapping around her throat with a crushing grip. She struggled, but it was no use. The creature was impossibly strong. "You will walk like me," it whispered, its breath rancid, its eyes glowing with an ancient, malevolent hunger. Her vision began to blur as the creature's cold hand gripped her face, forcing her to stare into its hollow eyes. She felt something shift inside her, as though her skin was too tight, her bones twisting under the surface. The pain was unbearable, like fire racing through her veins, twisting and breaking her. The creature's voice filled her head, drowning out her thoughts. "You will take my place." Leah felt her body changing, her skin stretched and rippled, her bones contorting painfully. Her screams turned into deep, animalistic growls as her humanity was stripped away, piece by piece. When she looked down at her hands, they weren't hers anymore. They were claws. Her reflection in the blood-stained sand was a nightmare, a creature of legend come to life. At dawn, Caleb found her truck abandoned by the cliffs, the air thick with silence. He called out her name, but there was no answer. Only the wind whispered through the sand, but from the ridge a figure watched him, its eyes gleaming in the morning light.